The intersection froze like someone had pressed pause on the entire city. Cars halted mid-roll, buses trembled with contained motion, and pedestrians stared as black sedans slid through red lights with predatory calm. Kiana Carter stood at the crosswalk, violin still pressed to her collarbone, watching a man in a shiny suit hover his fingers over her coin-filled case like he owned her dignity. She couldn't hear his mockery, but she could see it. The exaggerated movements, the pointed gestures at her hearing aid, the way people around them stepped back as if cruelty was contagious. Her bow trembled against the strings as humiliation burned through her chest. Then he stepped out of the lead sedan. Tall, composed, dangerous in the way that didn't need volume. His dark coat moved like water, his expression calm enough to terrify. When his eyes found hers across the frozen intersection, something shifted, not just in the air, but in the very foundation of what Kiana thought possible. He approached slowly, hands visible, like he understood she'd been startled, like he wasn't here to take. "Are you okay?" he mouthed, words shaped with deliberate care. And somehow, impossibly, Kiana believed he meant it. Kiana Carter learned soul the way some people learned music, through patterns, not sound, not chatter, not the endless horns that made tourists jump and locals swear. Patterns. The city was a living score written in vibration, the shudder of buses as they leaned into turns, the staccato tap of heels at crosswalks, the deep, rolling tremor of subway lines passing beneath the pavement like distant heartbeats. Kiana couldn't hear any of it, but she felt it, through the soles of her boots, through the violin pressed to her collarbone, through the bow's pull that turned silent air into something she could live inside. She stood at the intersection in Jongno where traffic lights changed with stubborn regularity, a place where people always had somewhere else to be. Her violin case lay open near the tactile yellow tiles, a small scatter of coins and folded bills inside like proof that she existed. A cardboard sign, laminated, because rain in Seoul had cruel timing, rested against the case, "Deaf musician. Thank you for listening with your heart." Kiana's curls were gathered into a low puff under a knit beanie, her scarf tucked tight, her fingers bare despite the cold because gloves dulled the only language she trusted, touch. When she raised the violin, the wood warmed against her skin. When she played, she didn't chase perfect pitch the way her first teachers demanded. She chased feeling, the resonant buzz that traveled through maple and spruce into bone, into breath. She started with a melody she'd written herself, a piece that rose like sunrise and then fell into something aching and brave. People slowed, some stopped. Most didn't, but enough did that the coins clinked every few minutes, each small drop a quiet yes. Kiana didn't look for faces. She'd learned not to. Faces could pity, faces could judge, faces could pretend she wasn't there. Hands were honest. Hands reached for pockets, hands hovered over her case, hands dropped coins with quick guilt or genuine warmth. The crosswalk vibrated with impatience. The pedestrian countdown blinked, and Kiana timed her phrases to it the way she always did, ending on the last second, letting silence hang like a held breath. That's when everything changed. A new vibration cut through the ground. Fast, aggressive footsteps. Kiana saw a man shove his way toward her, the kind of guy who wore confidence like a cheap jacket. Shiny suit, slick hair, eyes hungry for attention. He leaned too close, mouth moving too fast, lips spitting words she couldn't fully catch. But she recognized the shape of mockery, the lifted corner of his mouth, the exaggerated widening of eyes. The way he pointed to her hearing aid like it was a punchline. Kiana's bow faltered for half a second. She forced herself to keep playing. The man laughed louder. She couldn't hear it, but she saw the shake of his shoulders, the way people around them stiffened. He mimed a violin with clownish movements, then pointed at her sign as if reading it for everyone like a joke. A couple nearby glanced away. A woman tightened her grip on her child's hand and pulled the kid back, not from the man, from Kiana, as if cruelty was contagious. Kiana swallowed the humiliation and tried to steady her wrist. She'd lived through this before. Strangers deciding her existence was entertainment. People thinking deafness meant weakness. That a black woman alone on a street corner meant easy target. The man's hand dipped toward her violin case. 2 fingers hovered over the coins. Kiana's stomach clenched. She stepped forward instinctively, and the man grinned, like he'd been waiting for her to react so he could claim the whole moment. Then the intersection did something impossible. It stopped. Not just around them. The whole artery of the city, both directions. Cars halted mid-roll as if an invisible hand had pressed pause. The vibration under Kiana's boots drained away so suddenly it felt like stepping into vacuum. Heads turned. Drivers stared. A bus froze at the line, its huge body trembling with contained motion. A black sedan slid into the intersection against the light, calm as a predator. Another followed, then another. Perfect spacing, perfect timing, like choreography. Doors opened. Men in dark coats stepped out with the quiet precision of people trained to occupy space without permission. They didn't look frantic. They didn't shout. They simply arrived, and the air rearranged itself around them. And then he stepped out. He didn't have to be loud to be powerful. He was the kind of man who didn't waste movement. Tall, broad-shouldered, hair neatly cut, face composed like stone warmed by fire. His coat was black wool, his gloves leather, his expression calm enough to be terrifying. But when his eyes landed on Kiana, something softened. Brief, real, controlled. He approached her slowly, hands visible, like he understood she'd been startled, like he wasn't here to take. The shiny suit man's grin died. He straightened, suddenly eager to become invisible. The newcomer didn't look at him yet. He stopped beside Kiana's case, crouched with deliberate care, and placed a thick bill inside. Not thrown, not flashed, just offered. Then he angled his face to hers so she could read his lips. "Are you okay?" The words were shaped carefully, slower than normal speech, an accommodation, not pity. Kiana blinked, her throat tightened. She nodded once. His gaze flicked to the man hovering near her case, and the calm in his expression turned cold, not violent, just final. He said something without raising his voice. Two guards moved like a door closing. The shiny suit man backed up, hands lifted in fake innocence, mouth flapping in excuses. Kiana watched the guards guide him away, not with fists, not with drama, but with a pressure that said, "You miscalculated." The boss turned back to her. "Keep playing," he said, lips clear, "if you want to." Kiana stared at him for a beat. Her heart pounded so hard she could feel it in her fingertips. She should have been scared. This was not normal. Nobody stopped traffic for a stranger, but the way he looked at her, steady, protective, as if the whole intersection was suddenly her space, made something inside her unclench. She lifted the violin again. She played. This time she played like she had nothing to apologize for. The crowd watched in stunned silence. Cars remained halted. The boss stood a few steps away, not looming, but positioned so no one else could crowd her. A shield without theatrics. The guards formed a loose ring. People didn't dare interrupt. When Kiana finished the piece, she lowered the violin slowly. The boss waited, patient, like he understood the ending mattered. He brought out his phone and held it up with large text. "I'm Jong-seo. Can I get you somewhere warm? No strings attached." Kiana stared. No strings attached. Coming from a man surrounded by men like that felt like a line from a movie. She pulled out her phone and typed back, thumb shaking, "Why?" He read it, then spoke, lips measured. "Because he disrespected you." A pause. "And because you didn't stop." Kiana's chest tightened. That second sentence landed like truth. She'd been trying her whole life not to stop, after the fever that stole her hearing as a teenager, after teachers told her she'd never be taken seriously, after her father called music an impossible hobby, after landlords and bosses and strangers treated her like she didn't belong anywhere. She typed, "I'm fine, I don't need saving." Jong-seo's mouth curved, not a smirk, not arrogance. Something warmer. Admiration. "I know," he said. "That's why I'm asking, not ordering." It was such a small difference, but it hit Kiana like oxygen. They went to a tiny soup place tucked down a side street, warm lights fogging the windows. He sat across from her, facing her so she could read him. He didn't talk too fast. When the waitress spoke, he repeated it slowly, making sure Kiana caught everything. He didn't treat her deafness like a spectacle, and he didn't treat her like she was fragile. He asked about her violin like it mattered, about her compositions, about where she learned. When she typed that she'd moved to Seoul alone because it was the only city big enough to swallow her loneliness. Without noticing, he didn't flinch. He told her carefully that he ran a business, logistics, shipping, property. He didn't call it Mafia. But Kiana wasn't naive, not after the way traffic had obeyed him like religion. "My father built this empire," he said, lips deliberate. "I inherited control, but control and choice aren't the same thing." Kiana studied his face. There was something heavy in his expression, like carrying weight that wasn't entirely his. She typed, "What would you choose?" Joon-seo stared at the words for a long moment. His jaw tightened as if he was swallowing an older version of himself. "Something that doesn't require fear," he said finally. The honesty in his voice made Kiana's pulse quicken. She'd expected smooth lies, practiced charm. Instead, he gave her something raw. When he walked her to the subway station, he didn't assume anything. He waited until she was safely on the platform before leaving. No lingering touches, no possessive gestures, just presence until she didn't need it anymore. Over the next weeks, Joon-seo appeared at her intersection more than once. Sometimes he just left money and walked away. Sometimes he stood nearby, hands in pockets, watching like her music was the only honest thing in his world. Once, when a group of men started to heckle, they stopped when they noticed him, like sunlight hitting roaches. He didn't have to do anything. His presence drew a boundary. Kiana hated that she liked it, because boundaries were intoxicating when you'd spent years being unprotected. But a boundary built by a dangerous man could become a cage. She started looking forward to seeing him, which terrified her more than any threat. When he brought her coffee, black, the way she liked it, she found herself memorizing the careful way he handed it to her, fingers brushing just long enough to feel intentional. When he asked about her music, really asked, she found herself explaining things she'd never told anyone. How she composed by feeling vibrations through her body, how she'd learned to read the mood of a room through the tension in people's shoulders, the rhythm of their breathing. "You see everything," he said one afternoon, watching her pack up her violin. "I have to," she replied, fingers moving in sign language before she caught herself. Joon-seo's eyes sharpened with interest, not confusion. "Teach me," he said. Kiana blinked. "What?" "Sign language. Teach me." The request hit her like a physical thing. Most people treated her signing like a curiosity or ignored it entirely. Nobody had ever asked to learn. "Why?" she typed. "Because I want to talk to you in your language," he said, "not just mine." That night, Kiana lay awake thinking about the way he'd said your language, not like it was foreign or lesser, but like it was something beautiful he wanted to understand. She started teaching him basic signs during their coffee meetings. His hands were larger than hers, scarred along the knuckles, but surprisingly gentle. He practiced with the same focus he probably brought to business negotiations, asking her to correct his form, remembering everything she showed him. When he signed "thank you" for the first time, clumsy but sincere, Kiana felt something crack open in her chest. "You're a quick learner," she signed, then spoke aloud. "I have good motivation," he replied, both speaking and signing simultaneously. The dual communication felt intimate in a way that made Kiana's skin warm, like he was meeting her halfway across a bridge she'd built alone. But intimacy with a man like Joon-seo came with shadows. She noticed them first as a feeling, eyes on her when she played, a presence that didn't belong to curious passers-by. Then as faces that appeared too often in different locations, men in unremarkable clothes who watched her with professional attention. When she mentioned it to Joon-seo, his expression went dark. "I'll handle it," he said, jaw tight. "Handle what?" Kiana typed. "Who are they?" Joon-seo's hesitation told her everything. His world had followed him to hers. "Rivals," he said finally. "People who think getting close to me means getting close to what I care about." The words hung between them like a confession and a warning. "So I'm a target because you care about me?" she typed. Joon-seo's face went still, like someone taking a hit without flinching. "Yes," he said, no deflection, no pretty lies. Kiana stared at him, fear and anger warring in her chest. She'd spent her whole life fighting to be seen as more than her disability, more than her race, more than someone who needed protection. Now she was being reduced to leverage in a game she never chose to play. But when she looked at Joon-seo's face, the genuine anguish there, the way his hands trembled slightly, she realized he was just as trapped as she was. The difference was, he'd chosen his cage. She hadn't chosen hers. The first threat arrived as a photo on her phone taken from across the street. Kiana on the median, head bowed over her violin, unaware. Pretty musician. Shame if the wrong note happens. Kiana's blood turned cold. She stared at the image, her own vulnerability captured in digital clarity. Someone had been watching her, close enough to photograph, patient enough to wait for the perfect moment of exposure. She didn't tell Joon-seo right away. She wanted to handle it herself, to prove she wasn't dependent. She changed her route, kept her head up, asked her music professor, Min-ji Park, to walk her to the subway after lessons. It didn't matter. The shadow followed. New photos arrived daily. Kiana entering her apartment building. Kiana at the grocery store. Kiana in the university practice rooms, bow raised, completely absorbed in her music. Each image came with messages that made her skin crawl. Such focus. Easy to sneak up on someone who can't hear us coming. Does she know how pretty she looks when she's scared? Tell your boyfriend we're watching. Kiana's hands shook as she deleted each message, but the fear remained, settling into her bones like winter cold. She started checking over her shoulder constantly, jumping at unexpected touches, sleeping with her phone clutched in her fist. Professor Park noticed first. "Kiana-ya," she said after a particularly tense lesson, her signing fluid and concerned. "You're holding tension in your shoulders. What's wrong?" Kiana hesitated. Professor Park had been her anchor since arriving in Seoul, a deaf Korean violinist who'd fought her own battles and won. But this felt too dangerous to share. "Just tired," Kiana signed back. Professor Park's dark eyes narrowed. She'd built a career on reading people's unspoken truths. "Tired doesn't make you flinch when doors close," she signed. "Talk to me." So Kiana did. She showed Professor Park the messages, watched her mentor's face harden with each screenshot. "This is not your fault," Professor Park signed firmly, "but you need help, real help." "I can handle it," Kiana replied, the signs sharp with frustration. "Handling it alone isn't strength, it's stubbornness," Professor Park shot back. "Who is this boyfriend they mentioned?" Kiana's chest tightened. She'd never called Joon-seo her boyfriend, but the word fit in ways that scared her. When Joon-seo finally found out, he didn't explode. He didn't punish the city. He came to her quietly, eyes darker than she'd ever seen them, voice controlled. "Show me," he said. Kiana handed over her phone with trembling fingers. She watched his face as he scrolled through the messages, saw his jaw clench tighter with each image. "I'm sorry," he said finally, lips clear and deliberate. "This is my fault." Kiana typed, "Then disappear." It hurt to write. It hurt to watch him read it. Joon-seo's face went still, like someone taking a hit without flinching. He nodded once. "I will," he said. "But first I have to make sure they stop looking at you like leverage." Kiana stared. He explained enough that a rival named Baek Hyun-tae wanted to prove Joon-seo could be controlled. A weakness could be exploited. And because Joon-seo had shown the world he cared about a deaf black violinist, the world decided she was a pressure point. "He's testing boundaries," Joon-seo said, his hands moving in the sign language she'd taught him. "Seeing how far he can push before I break." "And if you break?" Kiana typed. "Then people die," he replied simply. "Not just you. Everyone under my protection." The weight of that hit Kiana like a physical blow. She wasn't just caught in the crossfire, she was the crossfire. "I won't let that happen," Joon-seo continued. "But keeping you safe means..." "Means what?" she typed when he hesitated. "Means showing them you're not leverage. You're untouchable." Kiana wanted to scream. She wanted to throw her violin case at the universe. Instead, she typed, "I'm not your weakness." Joon-seo's gaze held hers, something fierce and tender at once. "No," he said, both speaking and signing. You're the reason I remember I'm not just what they made me. That scared her most of all, because if she mattered to him that much, the stakes were no longer theoretical. The next morning, Joon-seo moved her to safety, not in a gilded cage, but in a quiet apartment above a family-run cafe outside the city. The couple who owned it, Yoon-ae and Seok-jin-han, treated Kiana like family. Yoon-ae learned simple signs and wrote notes in large letters. Seok-jin fixed the door lock twice and added a second chain like Kiana's safety was personal pride. "They're good people," Joon-seo said as he helped her settle in. "They owe me nothing. They're doing this because they want to." Kiana looked around the small apartment, clean, warm, filled with the smell of coffee and fresh bread from downstairs. It felt like sanctuary. "How long?" she typed. "Until it's over," he replied. "And if it's never over?" Joon-seo's expression grew heavy. "Then I'll make sure it is." The way he said it, like a promise and a threat, made Kiana's stomach clench. That night, alone in the unfamiliar bed, Kiana stared at the ceiling and tried to process how her life had become a chess game, where she was both the prize and the pawn. Joon-seo visited only when it was safe. He never forced intimacy. He never assumed her forgiveness. He brought her sheet music, a better shoulder rest for her violin, warm gloves with the fingertips cut so she could still feel the strings. And slowly, against every instinct Kiana had, she began to see him not as a storm, but as a man trying to step out of one. One evening, as snow began to fall outside the cafe windows, Joon-seo admitted something that made Kiana's breath catch. "I'm trying to leave," he said, lips deliberate and careful. "Not just the rival. All of it. But leaving isn't a clean door. It's consequences." Kiana studied his face in the lamplight, the exhaustion there, the weight of choices made and unmade. She typed slowly. "Then choose consequences that heal." Joon-seo stared at the screen as if it was a language he'd never been taught. "I don't know how," he signed, the movements uncertain but sincere. Kiana reached across the small table and covered his hands with hers. His skin was warm, scarred, real. "Start with truth," she signed against his palms. "Even when it hurts." Especially when it hurts, she thought but didn't say. Because the truth was, she was falling for a man whose world could destroy her. And the truth was, he was trying to build a new world where that wouldn't matter. The question was whether they'd both survive the construction. The truth came in pieces. Like a puzzle Kiana wasn't sure she wanted to complete. Joon-seo began shifting his world in ways nobody expected, moving assets into legitimate hands, dissolving predatory contracts, cooperating with investigations that could burn his reputation but protect the people under him from chaos. He didn't become a saint overnight. He became something harder, accountable. But accountability in his world came with a price. "Beck is escalating," he told her one grey afternoon, snow melting against the cafe windows. "He knows I'm trying to leave. He's making it personal." Kiana watched his hands as he spoke, noting the new tension in his shoulders, the way he kept checking his phone. "What does that mean?" she typed. Joon-seo hesitated, and that hesitation told her everything. "It means he's not just threatening you anymore," he said finally. "He's threatening everyone I've ever protected, the shop owners who pay for security, the families in my territory, the people who work for me." Kiana's stomach dropped. "Because of me?" "Because of me," Joon-seo corrected firmly. "Because I chose to care about something more than fear." The distinction mattered, but it didn't make the guilt easier to carry. That night Kiana couldn't sleep. She stood at the window, watching snow fall in the courtyard behind the cafe, thinking about all the lives tangled up in her and Joon-seo's story. People she'd never met, whose safety now depended on choices she'd never made. When her phone buzzed, she almost ignored it. Then she saw the message. "Your boyfriend thinks he's clever, but we know where you are." Attached was a photo of the cafe's front entrance, taken from across the street. Recent, based on the snow accumulation. Kiana's hands shook as she called Joon-seo. He arrived within 20 minutes, moving through the back entrance with 2 guards. His face was stone, but his eyes burned. "Pack everything," he said. "Now." "Where are we going?" Kiana typed as she threw clothes into her bag. Somewhere Beck can't reach, he replied. But as they prepared to leave, Yune appeared in the doorway, her face pale with fear. They took Seok Jin, she said in broken English, hands shaking. Men came to the market, they said to tell you. Joon-seo went completely still. Kiana watched the transformation happen in real time, the careful, controlled man she'd come to know disappearing behind something colder, more dangerous. Where? He asked, voice deadly quiet. Yune handed him a note with trembling fingers. Joon-seo read it and Kiana saw his jaw clench. What does it say? She typed. He showed her the screen of his phone. Trade. The girl for the old man. Warehouse District, Pier 7. Come alone or we start sending pieces. Kiana's blood turned to ice. You can't, she typed frantically. It's a trap. I know, Joon-seo replied. Then don't go. Joon-seo looked at her, and for the first time since she'd known him, she saw something break in his expression. Seok Jin has 3 grandchildren, he said quietly. He fixed your lock because he wanted you to feel safe. I won't let him die for my choices. And I won't let you die for mine, Kiana typed back. This isn't your choice to make, he said, but gently. Yes, it is. Kiana stood, pulling on her coat. I'm coming with you. Absolutely not. You said it yourself, they want me. So let's give them what they want. Joon-seo stared at her like she'd suggested jumping off a building. Kiana, no, I won't risk you. You're not risking me, she typed, fingers flying. I'm choosing this. There's a difference. She could see him struggling, torn between protecting her and respecting her autonomy. I have a plan, she continued typing, but I need you to trust me. What plan? Kiana explained quickly, her idea forming as she typed. It was dangerous, maybe stupid, but it played to her strengths, her ability to read people, to move silently, to be underestimated. Joon-seo listened, his expressions cycling through disbelief, admiration, and terror. It could work, he said finally, but if anything goes wrong, then we handle it together, Kiana interrupted. The warehouse district at night was a maze of shadows and shipping containers. Kiana moved through it like she'd learned to move through the world, carefully, observing everything, trusting her other senses to guide her. She could feel the vibrations of footsteps through the concrete, the subtle changes in air pressure that meant doors opening and closing. When she finally spotted the warehouse, she could sense the tension radiating from it like heat. Joon-seo was already inside, she knew, walking into Bayek's trap with the kind of controlled courage that made her chest ache. Kiana circled to the back entrance, moving through shadows with the patience she'd learned from years of being overlooked. People rarely noticed a deaf black woman until she wanted them to. Through a grimy window, she could see the scene inside. Joon-seo standing in the center of the space, hands visible, while Beck's men formed a loose circle around him. Seok Jin sat tied to a chair, blood on his face, but alive. And Beck, a thin man with sharp features and expensive clothes, paced like a predator, savoring the moment before the kill. Kiana couldn't hear the conversation, but she could read the body language. Beck was gloating. Joon-seo was calculating. The guards were confident. None of them were watching the exits. Kiana slipped inside through a service door, moving along the wall where shadows were deepest. She'd texted the police before arriving, not to save them, but to ensure witnesses. Whatever happened here would be documented. She reached Seok Jin first, cutting his bonds with the knife Joon-seo had given her weeks ago. The old man's eyes widened when he saw her, but she pressed a finger to her lips. Then she did something that would either save them all or get them killed. She stepped into the light. You wanted me, she said aloud, her voice carrying across the warehouse. Here I am. Every head turned. Joon-seo's face went white with terror and fury. Beck smiled like Christmas morning. The famous deaf violinist, he said, approaching slowly. You're even prettier than your photos. Kiana forced herself to stand still as he circled her, every instinct screaming to run. You know, Beck continued, I was going to kill your boyfriend quickly, but now that you're here, I think we'll take our time. That's when Kiana smiled. You should have done your research, she said. Beck frowned. What? I said you should have done your research. Kiana's voice was steady, clear. See, the thing about being deaf is that people assume you're helpless. They forget that losing one sense makes all the others stronger. She felt the vibrations through the floor before anyone else. Heavy vehicles surrounding the building, boots hitting pavement, the systematic movement of tactical teams. I felt them coming 5 minutes ago, she continued, as the first flashlight beams cut through the windows. Did you really think Joon-seo would come alone without backup? The warehouse erupted into chaos as police flooded in from every entrance. Bayek's men scrambled for weapons, but they were outnumbered and outmaneuvered. In the confusion, Joon-seo reached her, pulling her against his chest as officers swarmed around them. You brilliant, terrifying woman, he said against her hair, voice shaking with relief and adrenaline. Kiana felt his heartbeat against her cheek, rapid and real. I told you to trust me, she replied. Never again, he said. Never again are you walking into danger for me. Then don't give me a reason to, she said simply. As they watched Beck being led away in handcuffs, Kiana realized something had fundamentally shifted, not just in their situation, but in how they saw each other. She wasn't his weakness or his salvation, she was his equal. And that changed everything. When the news broke that Bayek Hyun-tae had been arrested and indicted, Seoul buzzed with rumor. Some called Joon-seo a traitor, some called him brilliant. Some said he'd only done it to protect a woman. Kiana didn't care what strangers said. She cared that Joon-seo showed up at her door the next morning with tired eyes and hands that trembled just a little, proof he was human under all that control. He held up his phone. I'm free enough to start over. If you'll let me. Kiana stared, tears burning. She typed slowly, I'm not a reward for your redemption. Joon-seo nodded immediately, relief and respect flooding his features. I know, he said, both speaking and signing. I'm asking for a chance to be beside you, not above you, not in front of you. Kiana's throat tightened. She didn't trust easily, but she trusted her body's truth. The calm she felt when he was near, the way he looked at her like her music was sacred, the way he never tried to own her. What does starting over look like? She typed. Joon-seo sat across from her at the small table in her temporary apartment, choosing his words carefully. It looks like legitimate business, clean money, no more territories or protection rackets. He paused. It looks like therapy, probably, learning how to be someone who wasn't raised to solve problems with fear. Kiana studied his face. The exhaustion there, but also something lighter. Hope, maybe. And us? She typed. Us looks like whatever you want it to look like, he said. Coffee dates, sign language lessons. Me learning to appreciate music I can't hear the way you do. He smiled, tentative. Maybe you teaching me to play violin badly. Despite everything, Kiana laughed. You want to learn violin? I want to understand what you love, he replied simply. The honesty in his voice made her chest ache in the best way. Over the following weeks, they rebuilt their relationship on new ground. Joon-seo kept his word, the legitimate business ventures, the therapy sessions, the careful dismantling of his father's empire. It wasn't clean or easy. There were legal complications, former associates who felt betrayed, financial losses that made him wince. But he persisted. Kiana watched him transform not into someone completely different, but into who he might have been if he'd been given different choices. The protective instincts remained, but without the violence. The strategic mind stayed sharp, but focused on building rather than controlling. And slowly, carefully, she let herself fall completely. The first time he kissed her, it was after a violin lesson where he'd managed to play Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star without making her wince. They were laughing about his bow technique when suddenly they weren't laughing anymore. He cupped her face gently, thumb brushing her cheek. Can I? He asked, lips clear. Kiana's heart hammered against her ribs. She nodded. When their lips met, it felt like coming home to a place she'd never been. Soft, careful, real. He kissed her like she was precious, like he couldn't quite believe she was there. When they broke apart, Kiana felt dizzy with possibility. I love you, she signed, the movements fluid and certain. Jong-seo's eyes widened. Then he signed back, careful but confident. I love you too. Months later, Kiana played on a real stage for the first time in Seoul, invited by Professor Min-ji Park to perform at a winter arts festival. The lights were bright enough to make her blink. The audience's presence hummed beneath the floorboards like ocean swell. In the front row, Jong-seo sat alone, no guards, no entourage, hands folded, eyes shining like he couldn't believe he was allowed to witness beauty without paying for it with fear. When Kiana lifted her violin and played, she felt the room fall into a silence she couldn't hear but could sense, everyone holding breath, everyone listening in the deepest way. She played the piece she'd written that first day at the intersection, but it sounded different now, fuller, like it had found its missing harmony. After the performance, she found Jong-seo backstage. He didn't touch her until she reached for him first. You were magnificent, he said, signing and speaking simultaneously. We were magnificent, she corrected, taking his hands in hers. Because that's what they'd built together. Not a fairy tale where he saved her, not a tragedy where love conquered all, but something more complex and real. A partnership where they saved each other daily in small ways, where his strength complemented hers, where her courage inspired his. Marry me, he said suddenly, the words tumbling out in both voice and sign. Kiana blinked. What? Marry me, he repeated more deliberately. Not because you complete me, or because I need you to be whole, but because I want to build a life with you, because I want to wake up every morning and choose you, and I want you to choose me back. Kiana stared at him, this man who'd learned her language, who'd dismantled his world to build a better one, who looked at her like she was both ordinary and extraordinary. Ask me again in a year, she said finally. Jong-seo's face fell slightly. Not because I don't love you, she continued quickly, but because I want to see who we are when the crisis is over, when we're just us. Understanding dawned in his expression, followed by something that looked like admiration. You want to make sure we're choosing each other, not just surviving together, he said. Exactly. Jong-seo smiled, the expression transforming his entire face. I can wait, he said. I'm good at waiting for things that matter. A year later, almost to the day, he asked again. They were in their shared apartment, a bright space above a music store where Kiana taught violin and Jong-seo ran his consulting business. She was practicing and he was reading contracts, and it was so beautifully ordinary that when he looked up and said, "Marry me," it felt like the most natural thing in the world. This time she said yes. They married in a small ceremony in the courtyard behind Yunai and Seok-jin's cafe. Professor Park officiated in both spoken Korean and sign language. Jong-seo's mother cried and told Kiana she was the best thing that had ever happened to her son. Kiana's parents flew in from Chicago and spent the entire reception learning basic signs from the guests. When Kiana and Jong-seo had their first dance, moving to music she felt through the floorboards and he heard through speakers, she realized something profound. She was no longer a woman bracing herself against cruelty at a crosswalk. She was an artist stepping fully into her own life. And Jong-seo, once a man who used power like armor, had learned how to love without control, to protect without possession, to stand beside her while she became unstoppable. A deaf street violinist played for coins, he said against her ear as they swayed together, until the Korean Mafia boss stopped every car. Kiana smiled, remembering that first impossible moment. And then what happened? She asked. Then they learned that the most beautiful music comes from two people choosing to harmonize, he replied. And in the warm light of the cafe, surrounded by everyone who mattered, Kiana knew he was right. Years later, Kiana Carter Kang stood in the same intersection where everything began. But now she wasn't alone. A small crowd had gathered around the memorial plaque the city had installed, a tribute to street musicians and the power of art to transform communities. Kiana ran her fingers over the raised letters, remembering the woman who used to play here for coins and validation. "Mama, tell the story again," signed a little girl with dark curls and her father's determined chin. Kiana smiled at her daughter, then at Jong-seo, who was holding their son while managing to sign simultaneously, a skill that still impressed her. "Once upon a time," Kiana began, her hands moving in fluid Korean sign language while she spoke aloud in English. There was a violinist who thought she was invisible. But she wasn't, their son interrupted, squirming in his father's arms. No, Joon-seo agreed, his voice warm with laughter. She was the most visible person in the world. She just needed someone to stop traffic long enough for everyone else to see. Kiana looked around at their life, messy, real, chosen daily, and felt the same vibration she'd felt that first day. Not fear this time. Joy.